Hello everyone. Tonight we are slipping back, way back into a world that could kill you before breakfast. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. Now picture this, a black sky smeared with stars, no cities, no hum of wires, just wind. The kind of wind that sneaks under animal hides and bites straight through your bones. You're hunched inside a tent made of mammoth skin, tied with sinew, half buried in snow to trap the warmth. There's a fire flickering in the middle, its light barely holding back the shadows, and you're curled beside your clan, your face inches from the dirt floor, wrapped in fur that still smells like its original owner. And even with all that, you're still cold. Not just shivering cold, we're talking your teeth are buzzing like a jaw harp cold, the kind of cold that steals your fingers before it steals your life. You probably wouldn't survive this, not even through the night. But somehow they did. The fire is the heart of everything, not just warmth, it's light, safety, food, and spirit. But fire doesn't come easy out here. Not in a world where dry wood is rare and flint tools are all you've got. You watch a woman, her hands trembling from the wind, kneel with practiced calm. She scrapes flint against iron pyrite again and again until finally, snap. A spark kisses the dried moss and smoke curls like breath. The clan breathes with it, like the fire's lungs are theirs, and that fire is guarded like gold. If it dies in the night, someone must get up, find more fuel, maybe even burn part of the shelter itself to keep the embers alive. One misstep, and the shelter becomes a tomb. We modern folks worry about leaving the heater on. These people, they worried about frost seeping into their nostrils and freezing their last breath mid-sleep. Now let's talk about fat. Yep, good old globs of grease. Prehistoric people treasured animal fat like it was holy oil. They rubbed it into their skin to block the cold, added it to meals for life-saving calories, and used it as fuel for lamps. Basically ancient nightlights with a slight smell of roast mammoth. There was even evidence some groups wore animal bladders filled with hot fat under their clothing for warmth. Fashion? No. But would I wear a steaming bladder belt to avoid freezing to death? Absolutely. One archaeologist joked that prehistoric fashion was less runway, more runaway from hypothermia. And let's not forget the rituals. In some groups, people gathered close before nightfall to perform movements, almost like dances, that generated body heat. Think of it like prehistoric Zumba. Maybe not graceful, but very necessary. The movement was as much survival as it was spiritual. Some groups believed that warming up the body also woke the spirit, making you less vulnerable to nighttime demons or just frostbite. Potato, potato. Here's a detail that might wrinkle your modern comforts. Inside that cramped, fur-lined shelter, everyone is there. Elders with hacking coughs, kids with snot trails, hunters smelling like wet dog and victory, all breathing the same stale air. The fire can't escape, so the shelter slowly fills with smoke, your eyes sting, and you start to wonder if death by smoke or cold would be quicker. Still that heat, that sticky, smoky, communal heat, is life. You hold it like a secret between your teeth, praying the wind doesn't notice. And remember, this isn't a one-time event. This is every night for months. No thermostats, no flannel sheets, just instincts and improvisation. They weren't just surviving, they were strategizing survival. One of the cleverest tricks? Tunneling. Some shelters were partially dug into the ground. Think of it like nature's basement. Below the frost line, it's warmer. Add a roof made from wood, hides, moss, and snow. Suddenly you've got insulation. Cold-proof, wind-proof, and with a chance of rodent neighbors. Historians still debate whether this style of living evolved from watching animal dens or just good old trial and error. Like, well, Tor fell into a hole last winter and didn't freeze, so let's all move underground. And that's the thing. Nothing was random. Every bizarre choice, every uncomfortable compromise was another step on the tightrope walk between life and death. Even the layout of the sleeping space mattered. Elders and children were placed in the center of the pile, where body heat collected. The strongest adults took the edges, the human walls against the night. Quirky detail? Some evidence suggests that families gave nicknames to their sleeping formations. One rough translation reads like The burrow bundle. If that doesn't sound like a prehistoric snuggle puddle, I don't know what does. We don't think of ancient people as clever, but honestly, they had to be. They survived a level of cold that would snap us like icicles, and they didn't just live through it, they learned from it, built around it, and passed down that knowledge in firelight whispers. So tonight, as your heater clicks on and your weighted blanket hugs your limbs, just remember, it wasn't that long ago we huddled together under mammoth skin, praying for a spark, rubbing grease on our cheeks and telling the fire to stay. Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing background music, and let's take a gentle stroll through the night together. You are still lying there, under that heavy fur that smells faintly like wet dog and smoke, listening to the faint pops of the fire, trying not to think about how cold your feet still are. But now let us take a closer look at what is keeping you from freezing into an ancient ice cube. Your clothes. And I don't mean just any clothes. We're talking about handmade reindeer hide tunics, mammoth fur boots, and hoods lined with wolf skin. Everything was layered, stitched, wrapped, and then probably re-wrapped again. Because when the wind howled and the temperature plummeted, what you wore was either your armor or your grave. It didn't happen overnight, though. There were no instruction manuals, just trial, error, and probably a lot of frozen fingers. One historical fact that gives us chills, literally, is that humans began using bone needles as far back as 40,000 years ago. Imagine that. No light bulbs, no wheels, but someone was already out there squinting under flickering firelight, stitching pants from elk skin using a sharpened rib and thread made from sinew. And it wasn't just survival, it was art. We found clothing remnants with carefully punched holes, dyed fabrics, and fur sewn in layers for extra warmth. Some garments even had decorations like little beads carved from bone or teeth. So yeah, prehistoric drip, stronger than expected. Now the weird bit, before hides were sewn, they were chewed. Yup, chewed. That's how you softened the leather before you could turn it into something wearable, which meant that Grandma's job might have included gnawing on a deer skin for an hour while humming lullabies to a baby in the corner. A charming mental image, isn't it? But think about the resourcefulness. You didn't just slap on any old skin, you had to choose the right animal for the right job. Fox fur for boots, because of its warmth. Bear hide for cloaks, because it was thick and intimidating. And if you were really fancy, ermine fur lining, which is like the prehistoric version of a luxury coat, with an expensive tag you keep forgetting to cut off. Some early people even stitched small pouches into their clothing, tiny pockets for holding bits of dried meat or flint flakes, which means prehistoric humans invented the cargo pant way before modern dads at barbecues did. There's also something kind of touching about how clothes were passed down, repaired, and altered. Archaeologists have uncovered garments with several layers of stitching, often overlapping. This suggests one coat may have seen generations of wear, patched up lovingly by hand again and again. Not so different from how some of us still wear our dad's old jacket, holes and all, just because it feels like home. But not everything about these clothes was practical. Historians still debate whether certain designs were purely for warmth or had symbolic meaning. For example, some researchers believe that elaborate fringe or patterns weren't just decorative, but told others about your role in the group. Was it rank, age, or maybe just a way to flirt from across the fire circle? One theory even suggests certain bone needles were intentionally broken after sewing burial clothes, meaning you wouldn't reuse a needle once it had dressed the dead. Respectful, a little eerie, and also just a good hygiene tip. So now let's zoom in. It's night again. You're watching a young hunter bent over a patch of hide, threading sinew with slow, frozen fingers. Each stitch is careful, silent, not just because everyone's asleep, but because this coat, it's for his child, who's just old enough to leave the sleep pile and shuffle toward independence and frostbite. The father ties off the last knot and presses the coat to his face, inhaling the animal's scent. The smoky residue, maybe even a little bit of hope. Will it be warm enough? Will it last the season? Will it keep his child alive long enough to stitch one of their own? Meanwhile, across the shelter, someone snores like a dying bear and someone else rolls over into the coals. A sharp hiss, a half-asleep curse. The fire's okay, no one's dead. The coat's done. That's a win. And let's not forget the footwear. Early boots were marvels of engineering. You had inner linings of fur worn hair side in for warmth, outer shells of tougher hide to block moisture, and sometimes even grass packed inside for insulation. That's right, prehistoric socks were grass. Honestly, better than some gym socks today. Here's a quirky little gem. Some footprints discovered in Ice Age clay show intentional toes-out prints, where people walked backwards to confuse predators or enemies. Imagine trying to survive the night and prank a saber-toothed tiger. Another detail? Footwear often left behind imprints in cold mud, but no corresponding upper body traces, leading some archaeologists to wonder, were people going barefoot under their clothes while wearing full boots? Or were some of these prints from kids playing in oversized boots, just like they still do today? All of this wasn't just adaptation, it was innovation, born out of discomfort, fear, and a really loud wind that didn't care if you were tired, grieving, or 8 months pregnant. You wore what worked, and if it didn't, you didn't live long enough to regret it. And still, even in all that hardship, there's evidence of love. Garments found in burial sites are often the best-made ones, stitched with extra care, with signs of having been worn but lovingly repaired. One child was buried in a fur coat too big for him, likely handed down from a parent. The sleeves crudely trimmed and lined with bits of moss. Warmth and goodbye, sewn together. So next time you zip up your fleece hoodie or complain your jacket doesn't match your shoes, remember this. Somewhere in our distant past, someone was gnawing on a caribou hide by firelight so their kid could make it through just one more freezing night. You wake up in the middle of the night, not because of a dream, but because someone just sneezed directly into your ear. Again. You try to shift without elbowing the person crammed against your ribs, but there's nowhere to go. You're in what prehistoric people called a sleep pile, what we might call extreme group cuddling. This wasn't about affection, it was about survival. The cold doesn't care about personal space, so bodies were packed in tight. Elders, children, hunters, dogs, everyone sandwiched together under layers of fur and shared breath. Imagine the smell. Now imagine never escaping it. The heat generated by 6 to 10 humans, packed like laundry in a basket, could mean the difference between life and death. And this wasn't just done on extra chilly nights. It was every night for months, maybe years. We're not entirely sure how they arranged themselves, but some archaeologists believe there was an unspoken system. The frail in the middle, protected by stronger bodies on the outside. The kids? Smushed somewhere in between, probably drooling on someone's fur hood. It wasn't exactly luxurious. You'd wake up with a foot in your face, a shoulder in your ribs, and someone softly snoring into your neck like a prehistoric espresso machine. And yet, this pile? It worked. It worked better than almost anything else they could have invented. Shared warmth, shared dreams, shared fleas. Historians still debate whether this nightly tangle was born purely out of practicality or whether it shaped the emotional closeness of early human groups. Some suggest that it reinforced social bonds, created lifelong trust. Others say no, it was just the only way to not turn into a human popsicle. One of the more quirky details we've found is that in some sleeping shelters, dogs were assigned sleep spots against people's backs. Not because they were pets, these dogs weren't playing fetch or wearing bandanas, but because they radiated heat like furry space heaters. One archaeological site in Siberia shows dog and human remains buried together in sleeping formation, suggesting that bond went deeper than just keeping warm. Now, not everyone was invited into the sleep pile. If you were sick, really sick, you might be isolated, left at the edge of the shelter with only a hide and a flickering ember. That wasn't cruelty. It was triage. A practical kind of love. Keep the many alive, even if it means letting one drift into the dark alone. Still, even in that tough calculus, there are moments of tenderness. Some graves show elders buried with worn furs or holding small tools likely gifted by children. One skeleton of a woman in her 70s, yes 70, was buried in a sleeping position, knees drawn up, with remnants of a shared cloak wrapped tightly around her. Even in death, someone tried to keep her warm. But let's rewind back to that middle-of-the-night moment in the sleep pile. The fires burned low. The wind outside sounds like it's trying to chew its way into the shelter. Someone shifts, pulling the hide tighter around their shoulders, accidentally uncovering your foot. You hiss, try to tuck it back in. The child beside you mutters something in their sleep, a language no longer spoken by anyone on earth, and curls into your side like a puppy. You don't go back to sleep, not really. You half doze thinking about the snow piled outside the shelter, about whether tomorrow the traps will have caught anything, or if you'll need to chew old leather for calories again. But for now, the warmth is enough. The smell of smoke, fur, sweat, and closeness, it's comforting in a way modern people have forgotten. Want a fun detail to take the edge off all this cold? Some early groups believed that certain sleep positions could predict your dreams. Curled on your left side meant you'd see ancestors. Curled on your right, the hunt. Sleep on your back, and you'd invite visions from the sky. And if you snored loudly enough to wake the dogs, well, that probably meant you were banished to the outer edge of the pile the next night, and still, humor made its way in. One carved bone figurine found at a sleeping site depicts what looks like a family tangle, with exaggerated limbs poking every which way, and a face in the middle with a classic "I'm stuck" expression. Proof, perhaps, that even prehistoric people had a sense of humor about their sleeping situations. It wasn't comfortable, but it worked, and in the coldest months of the year, that was everything. Today, we sleep in silence, in big beds with weighted blankets and white noise machines, but there's a part of our brain deep down that still remembers the sleep pile. That feels comforted by shared warmth, by the sound of breathing around us, by the ancient instinct that says, if we huddle close, we might just make it. It's pitch dark now, the kind of dark that feels heavy, like it's pressing down on your skin. No moon, no stars, just the sound of snow crunching under someone's feet outside the shelter. But inside, the fire is out, and your group is trying to sleep. Only not everyone can. Someone's mumbling. Someone else is laughing too quietly for it to be joy. One of the elders is swaying side to side in the corner, his eyes wide open and unfocused, whispering to himself in that old sing-song rhythm again. No, this isn't madness, not exactly. What you were witnessing is one of humanity's most unusual and cold-weather-specific adaptations, using altered states of mind to survive long nights that would otherwise break a person. In some prehistoric communities, the nights weren't just survived through warmth and sleep, they were endured through ritual intoxication, hallucination, and trance. It sounds wild, but stay with me. It wasn't recreational. It was survival. Because sometimes, when the cold is unbearable, the hunger gnaws and there's no hope in sight, you don't want to just survive the night, you want to escape it. Enter the reindeer. Here's your quirky fact of the night. Some ancient northern tribes discovered that reindeer, when they eat certain red and white mushrooms, Amanita muscaria, the real-life inspiration for Mario mushrooms, get very weird, wobbly, unbothered by pain, twitchy-legged weird. And here is see where it gets wonderfully gross. Humans realized they could drink the reindeer's urine to feel those same effects without being poisoned. Yes, you heard that right. Mushroom-fed reindeer urine, nature's original chill pill. Now, we're not saying everyone was out there sipping on forest lattes, but there's enough evidence from oral histories, art, and patterns of mushroom growth near ancient campsites that ritual use of hallucinogens was a real part of coping with the endless night. And historians still debate whether these altered states were purely medicinal or deeply spiritual. Was it about dulling physical pain, or did people believe the visions carried guidance, messages, or even warmth from ancestral spirits? Picture this: a quiet man, hunched by the dying fire, chanting softly. His breath fogs the air. He drinks something bitter from a horn cup. A few minutes later, his head rolls back, eyes wide. Around him, the others sit in stillness, listening. Maybe he's speaking with the ancestors. Maybe he's just trying to forget the cold. Or maybe both. It's not just mushrooms either. Some groups burned specific herbs and roots in their shelters, not for the scent but for the mild numbing effects. You inhale enough of the smoke, and suddenly the cold doesn't bite quite as hard. You don't feel warmer, but you stop caring that you're not. Here's where the story gets a little dreamy. One tribe, based near the edge of the Siberian forest belt, told of snow spirits who walked through the night, looking for lonely fires. If they found your shelter and saw fear in your heart, they would sneak into your dreams and steal your breath. But if they saw bravery or laughter, they'd leave you a vision instead. That's why some people would dance before sleep or tell absurd, silly stories around the fire. Laughter wasn't just joy, it was protection. So yes, prehistoric stand-up comedy might have been a literal life-saving skill. To imagine someone in your group making fart noises with a stretched piece of hide, pretending to be a mammoth. Everyone laughs, not because it's funny, it really isn't, but because it keeps the cold spirits away. And isn't that the most human thing? To fight fear with ridiculousness, to use imagination like a torch. Now let's talk about dreams. Some sleeping shelters included carved dream bones, small pieces of antler with marks and symbols etched on them. These may have been passed between people at night, held while sleeping, or interpreted in the morning. Were they dream diaries, psychic scorecards, early attempts at understanding the subconscious? Historians still debate, but clearly, dreams were more than random images. They were messages. One well-preserved site shows a sleeping circle arranged around a pile of decorated stones. On each stone, a crude eye was carved. No faces, just eyes, watching, guarding. Were these dream stones meant to protect the group through sleep? Or were they reminders to stay awake and aware in a world where sleep could be your last mistake? It's also worth noting that some individuals, usually elders, were given special status as dream watchers. They stayed awake part of the night to listen for sounds outside, feed the fire, and occasionally interpret murmured sleep talk. Not a bad job if you're an insomniac with a strong bladder and no fear of wolves. But of course it wasn't all mystical vibes and urine cocktails. There was fear too. Nightmares, panic. You're sleeping, and the cold wraps itself around your chest. You dream of falling into an ice river. You wake up gasping, heart pounding, and for a moment you're not sure where you are, or if you're still dreaming. That kind of fear, it's familiar, it's ancient, and it's one more reason people turn to the strange and surreal for comfort. One last strange but true tidbit before we wrap this up. In some ancient groups, it was believed that sleeping too deeply meant your soul might get lost on the other side. So people tied small charms to their wrists, shells, feathers, teeth, to keep their spirits anchored to their bodies, like prehistoric seat belts for the soul. So next time you drift off on your memory foam mattress with your Spotify rain sounds and your alarm set for 8 a.m., just remember, someone 12,000 years ago was curled up in a pile of furs, a bone charm tied to their wrist, a smile on their face from a joke about mammoth farts whispering thanks to a reindeer for one more strange half-warm night on this very same earth. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing background music, and let's take a gentle stroll through the night together. The wind has stopped, not because it's calmed, but because you're deep inside stone now. There's a reason prehistoric people crawled into caves, and it wasn't because they liked feeling cozy next to bats. Caves were survival. Real estate with built-in insulation, stone walls that didn't blow away in a storm, and air pockets that stayed several degrees warmer than the outside world, even when the trees were snapping from frost. You probably wouldn't survive a single night in the open. But deep in the earth, you just might. Let's imagine it. You're following a flickering torch into a limestone chamber that smells like damp moss and soot. The entrance has been narrowed with slabs of stacked stone, almost like a front door, to block the wind. Every footstep echoes. The firelight shudders on the walls, revealing faint traces of red ochre handprints, reminders that someone else came in here long ago, trying to beat the same cold. But this isn't just shelter. This is strategy. Caves offered more than protection. They gave early humans a place to store heat. Once a fire had burned for hours, the rocks themselves radiated warmth. It was like laying next to a giant, slightly judgmental stone grandma who never cooled off. Quirky little detail. Some groups even smeared animal fat along the walls to slow down heat loss, an ancient version of insulation with a side of eau de bison. Hey, it worked. Caves also had airflow, surprisingly. Not all caves, mind you, but smart groups picked ones with natural chimneys, vents where smoke could escape and fresh air could circulate. Historians still debate whether they learned this by trial and error, or whether early humans had a kind of cave sense. You had to pick right. The wrong cave. Too damp, too narrow, too full of bears. And yes, there were a lot of bears. Let's take a moment to appreciate just how brave this was. Imagine walking into a dark cave, pitch black, strange smells, bones scattered around, and still thinking, yeah, this is the spot, let's move the family in. No flashlights, just flickering torches and whatever instincts whispered from the back of your brain. If the ground was dry, the air didn't sting your lungs and there weren't fresh claw marks on the walls, you made it home. And once you did, you made it yours. There's evidence that some prehistoric groups marked the walls around their sleeping areas with symbols, carved spirals, handprints, and even silhouettes of animals. These weren't just doodles. They may have been boundaries, prayers, or warnings. One theory suggests certain sleeping chambers were decorated only by women. Another says the marks were left for future visitors, like saying, "We were here, we survived." One cave in France, Chauvet, features wall paintings that are more than 30,000 years old. And they're not random scribbles. They show lions, rhinos, mammoths, creatures moving in herds, stalking, fighting. But what's eerie? These paintings are in the deepest, darkest parts of the cave, places where no one would sleep, no one would just hang out. So why go that deep? Some researchers believe those inner caves were sacred, used for ritual during harsh winters. The further you walked into the dark, the closer you came to the spirit world. Or maybe they just needed a quiet place to scream into the void. Hard to blame them. Back in your own little cave, let's imagine the setup. The floors covered in animal hides, layered thick like prehistoric carpet. You and the others lie on the driest part, often close to a wall, where the rock holds warmth best. The fire pit sits in the center, ringed with smooth stones to contain the coals. There might be a small stash of food tucked in the coolest corner, raw roots, dried meat, maybe some snow-packed berries if it's midwinter. And right above that stash, a carved niche in the stone, holding a tiny figurine. Maybe it's a fertility charm. Maybe it's just someone's lucky rabbit skull. Either way, it's watching you sleep, and somehow that's comforting. Let's sprinkle in a light moment, because even in a cave, humans found time for weird little pleasures. At one site, archaeologists found what appears to be a collection of painted pebbles near the main fire pit. Some smooth, some colorful, some deliberately placed in patterns. Could they be a game? Meditative tools? The world's first fidget stones? One theory suggests the group played little games with them to pass the time between stories. Another says they were simply nice to look at. You know what? Fair. It's also prehistoric cave dwellers had to organize. I mean, imagine trying to find your sharpest flint blade in the middle of a pitch-black shelter with 20 other people stepping over you. So they created zones, one corner for tools, one for sleeping, one for the toilet. Yep, cave toilets were real, though let's use that word generously. You picked a back corner, dug a shallow pit, maybe burned a bit of dried moss to mask the smell. Was it elegant? No, but it beat going outside into the blizzard. Bare bottom plus wind chill, Shah's bad night. Let's not forget the acoustics. Caves amplified sound. If someone whispered a song on one side, it could echo like a ghost voice on the other. And so, some tribes sang at night, not for fun, but as a kind of sonar. A way of feeling out the space, making sure everyone was still breathing. One tribe, it said, sang a specific 5-note melody before sleep each night. Passed down generation after generation, never written down, just hummed quietly to the stone until everyone's eyes shut. A lullaby for the rocks. So tonight, as you curl deeper into your blanket, remember this. We come from people who slept in the dark with cave lions, painted the walls beside them, sang into the shadows, and warmed stone with their bodies. You probably wouldn't survive their night, but somehow they did. You're asleep now, but not fully. It's the kind of sleep where you're listening even while dreaming, because you have to. One crack of a branch, one shuffle of paws, and it could mean danger. But for the moment, all is still and you're wrapped in warmth. A bear's warmth. Not a live bear, thank goodness. But its pelt, thick, heavy, and still smelling vaguely of the creature's last angry breath. Prehistoric people didn't wear animal skins for fashion. They wore them to become part of the animal, or at least, that's what they believed. It's one thing to throw on a coat. It is another to crawl inside the skin of a creature that could have ended your life the day before. But here you are, tucked under layers of fur, grease, and possibly a few fleas, trusting that the beast you conquered will now protect you from the cold. We've found burials with individuals wrapped entirely in bear hides, not cut and stitched, just wrapped, as if the bear was hugging them into the next world. Historians still debate whether these burials were reserved for hunters, elders, or those seen as spiritually linked to the animal. But the message is clear. Wearing the bear meant more than just warmth. It meant strength. And it wasn't just bears. Wolves, lynxes, muskoxen. If it had fur and it lost a fight with you, chances are its skin ended up draped around someone's shoulders. But here's the weird part. They didn't always wear the fur side out. Sometimes they reversed it. Why? Possibly to let the animal's spirit see, to honor it. Or maybe just because inside out was warmer. Either way, it's giving ancient high fashion with emotional depth. You want a quirky fact? Some groups believed that sleeping with your head on a wolf pelt gave you dreams of hunting success, or nightmares about being hunted, depending on the night. Now, the grease. Animal grease wasn't just for cooking or smearing on tools. It was spread directly on skin as a barrier against cold, wind, and bugs. Imagine rubbing thick, sticky, musky fat all over your face before bed. Not exactly spa night, but it worked. That layer of blubber could trap heat better than any modern moisturizer, and guess what? They probably smelled awful. One archaeologist once described ancient dwellings as meat-scented ovens with legs. Between the smoke, the sweat, the grease, and the animal pelts, your prehistoric sleep pile would have smelled like a jerky store lost in a wildfire. But it kept you alive, so nobody was complaining, except maybe about the lice. Now let's paint a scene. A young woman is curled beside the fire, draped in reindeer hides, her face streaked with ash. She's carving a small charm, perhaps a tiny bear with stubby legs and a not-so-menacing face. She'll tie it to the collar of her coat, not because it's cute, but because she believes the bear will guide her dreams, maybe even walk with her in sleep. Across the shelter, her brother is trying to trim a wolf skin into a hood. He's not doing a great job. One ear is way bigger than the other. But he doesn't care. The spirit of the wolf doesn't care about fashion symmetry, only warmth, only loyalty. And somewhere near the entrance, the elder is mumbling again, his cloak so thick with layers it's more beast than man. He whispers a name. Maybe it's the name of the animal he wears. Maybe it's someone he lost. Or maybe in the quiet between fire pops, he's just saying thank you to the creatures that made this night possible. You see, wearing animals wasn't just survival, it was partnership. These weren't things you hunted and forgot they were part of your world. You wore their fur, yes, but you also buried their bones with ceremony. Some tribes even believed that every animal had to be honored, or its spirit would refuse to return in future hunts. Kind of poetic, right? The idea that survival depended not just on conquest, but on gratitude. Here's one more sweet detail. In one frozen grave, archaeologists found a child wrapped in multiple layers of small furs, rabbit, fox, even bird feathers. But tucked into the bundle, near the child's chest, was a tiny paw. Possibly a bear cub's. Possibly a toy. Possibly a last connection to something warm and fierce. Fakes you want to hug your blanket a little tighter, doesn't it? And speaking of blankets, prehistoric people had those too. Not the fuzzy ones you microwave, but massive layered hides sewn together, sometimes stuffed with dried grass or moss for extra insulation. Basically ancient sleeping bags. Some were even designed to wrap around the body like cocoons. You wouldn't toss and turn. You'd curl into yourself, layered in warmth, dreaming of mammoths and firelight. The debate still rages about whether certain garments and furs were considered sacred or simply utilitarian. Were bear cloaks reserved for spiritual leaders? Were wolf hides worn by the best hunters? Or did people just grab what fit? We don't have all the answers. But the more we uncover, the more it's clear. These people didn't just endure the cold. They understood it, worked with it, wrapped themselves in the wild and whispered to it for safety. So tonight, as you tuck in under your clean synthetic comforter, think about that. Someone thousands of years ago was rubbing bear grease on their cheeks and whispering a thank you to the spirit of a creature that kept them from freezing to death. You probably wouldn't survive that world, but you're here because someone did. There's something different about this night. The cold isn't worse, but the silence is. It stretches so wide and still that it starts to feel loud. No wind, no cracking branches, just your breath and the slow creak of the shelter as it adjusts in the frost. The others are asleep. The fire is down to soft embers, glowing like the eyes of an animal too tired to pounce. You know you won't sleep tonight, not with that silence pressing against your ears. So you shift gently from the sleep pile, pull your fur tighter, and make your way toward the entrance. What you're doing is dangerous, but necessary. The night watch. Every clan had someone who stayed up or at least half awake through the coldest stretch of night. Sometimes it was an elder who no longer slept deeply. Sometimes it was the youngest hunter, proving his worth. Sometimes it was just whoever lost the short stick after dinner. And while this doesn't sound heroic, let me assure you, you probably wouldn't survive even one shift of night duty in the Paleolithic, not without giving in to fear or nodding off and freezing solid. The stars above you are so bright it is like someone smeared crushed diamonds across a black sky. You can't see the moon, that's bad. No moon means more danger. Wolves are bolder in darkness, and the spirits, they prefer to walk when the sky is empty. Historians still debate whether prehistoric people believed spirits were literal beings or just metaphors for fear and memory. But either way, they treated the night like something alive, something to be respected, watched. You step away from the shelter, just a little, to listen better. The snow crunches softly underfoot. Somewhere in the forest you hear a sound like breathing, but it might just be trees settling. This isn't your first night watch, you've done this before. But you remember when it was. You were 13, maybe 14. You sat next to your uncle staring into the fire like it held answers. You asked him, "What am I watching for?" He didn't answer at first, then he said, "You'll know when it's too late." Comforting. He handed you a stick with the end charred into a crude point. Your first weapon. It was mostly ceremonial. If something did come, you'd barely have time to scream, but somehow holding it gave you courage. Let's pause for a moment of levity because you deserve it. In one ancient site, a torch with a sharpened point was discovered covered in claw marks from a badger. Not exactly the monster you'd imagine. One theory suggests a young watchman once used it to fend off an overly curious badger trying to raid the food stash. A heroic victory unless the badger got the last laugh. Now back to the seriousness of night duty. The role wasn't just about keeping watch for predators or enemies. It was a ritual, a test. Some believed that the night revealed who you really were. You were stripped of distractions, just your thoughts, your breath, and the dark. Some night watchers sang to themselves, softly, little hums or chants to keep their blood moving. Others carved shapes into wood or stone, the slow rhythm helping them stay awake. One fascinating archaeological find? A small stone figure of a sitting man, knees to chest with deep grooves carved across the back, like tally marks. Maybe it was a timekeeper. Maybe it was made during one long, brutal shift, counting the hours until dawn. And the dawn always came. Eventually. But in the meantime, watchers had to be clever. There are reports, interpretations of prehistoric people placing small stones in their palms while they sat. If they nodded off, the stone would drop and clatter, waking them. Ancient alarm clocks, powered by fear. Let's talk about how it felt. Sitting by the fire alone while the others breathe behind you. You hear something, a crack, a crunch. Your whole body freezes. Your heartbeat gets loud, pounding in your ears. You grip your stick, eyes wide, squinting into the black. Then, nothing, just a fox maybe, or your imagination. But that doesn't help the cold sweat down your spine. Still, you don't leave your post. Because if you do, if you fail and something does come, the whole group is gone. You carry that weight now. And somehow, the cold isn't as bad as the pressure in your chest. Here is the quirky bit for this section. There is an old story from a northern tribe about a night watcher who used to talk to the fire. Not pray. Talk. Like a friend. He believed it was alive, and he'd ask it questions. Will it snow tomorrow? Are the spirits near? Did you see her look at me today? The fire never answered, but it always flickered when he asked. That was enough. Modern people have forgotten this kind of connection. We light a candle and call it ambiance. Back then, the flame was your confidant, your shield, your only friend during the longest stretch of night. Eventually, the sky begins to shift. Not bright, not yet, but the black starts to fade into a deep navy. You hear someone stirring inside. A cough, a yawn. Someone's foot kicking through the hides, looking for warmth. And you made it. You survived the watch. The fire's low but still glowing. The stars are fading and your shift is over. You won't be praised. No one will thank you. But they'll sleep better the next night knowing someone like you will be out there again. That's the deal. That's always been the deal. So tonight, as your motion detector lights blink on and your phone charges beside you, know this. Once upon a time, someone sat in the snow gripping a pointed stick, humming softly to the fire, while keeping death from your ancestors' door. The sky's awake now, but not bright. It's that soft grey-blue haze that rolls in just before sunrise, the kind of light that makes every branch look like a figure, every stone like a crouching beast. You're exhausted. Your joints creak like thawing wood, your eyelids feel like they're lined with grit, and your fingers, they've forgotten what warm is. But this is no time to rest, because once the night's survived, the real work begins. It's time to gather the morning fire, not light it, gather it, because prehistoric fires weren't started from scratch every day. No one was out there rubbing sticks like a scout badge was on the line. If the fire died, it was a disaster. So every night before sleep, someone was assigned to bury hot embers in ashes, insulate them under layers of bark or dung, and tuck them into a pit to smolder gently until morning. That was your warmth, your light, your life, hidden under a mound of grey dust. And in the early light, someone, usually the same poor soul who did night watch, had to kneel by that pile, hands trembling, gently blowing those coals back to life. A few sparks, a curl of smoke, a little prayer. You didn't call the fire fire, you called it by its name, whatever name your group believed it had. Because the fire wasn't a thing. It was a being. Historians still debate whether prehistoric fire rituals were more functional or spiritual. Were the songs sung to fire about control or gratitude? One theory suggests fire was treated like a member of the family. You didn't shout around it, you didn't insult it. You asked, you thanked, you waited. If the fire came back to life, the day could begin. And speaking of mornings, let's take a moment to acknowledge that breakfast was not a thing. Not the way we imagine it anyway. You didn't roll out of your mammoth hide sleeping bag and fry up some eggs. You might chew a frozen chunk of dried meat if you were lucky. If you weren't, you just skipped food entirely and hoped to find something before nightfall, which is why mornings often began not with eating, but with scavenging. Not hunting, scavenging. It's less glamorous, but honestly probably more successful. You'd walk through the crusted snow with a spear or a sharp rock, looking for signs. A trail of blood, a broken branch, a half-frozen carcass left behind by wolves. A bone, a tuft of fur, a little patch of red in the white. You had to be fast. Carrion didn't last long. You were competing with foxes, crows, other humans. Some groups even sent out scouts before dawn, while the predators were still asleep. It was dangerous, but if you brought back a deer leg, even a squirrel tail, you were a hero. Here is your quirky moment. Archaeologists in Eastern Europe once found a pit filled with deliberately cracked animal bones, arranged in neat lines. Not random waste, a pattern. Some believe it was a sort of bone library, a record of what was eaten and when. Others think it was just a weird kid with a strong aesthetic sense. Honestly, same energy as arranging your snacks before eating them. Now let's talk about morning rituals. You didn't bathe, not in water, not when it was that cold. But people still had routines. Some smeared fresh ash on their faces, partly for warmth, partly as a symbol of waking up new. Others sat in silence for a few minutes, facing the sun, humming low melodies to greet the day. In one culture, it was believed that if you greeted the morning without sound, the spirits would whisper helpful knowledge to you throughout the day. If you made noise, the spirits would sulk. And no one wants sulky spirits following them around the tundra. And children, they didn't sleep in. They were often the first to move, not because they were eager, Because they were cold. Little feet would scramble to the fire pit the second the embers were uncovered, shaking, noses red, rubbing hands together like tiny prehistoric interns. There's something oddly sweet about how family groups began their day. You'd hear soft coughing, groaning, rustling of hides, maybe a low chuckle as someone discovered a frozen animal dropping stuck to their heel. Not exactly coffee shop ambience, but it was their version of getting ready. One fire circle site shows tiny footprints mixed with adult ones, and beside them, a collection of cracked nutshells. Someone gave the kids nuts to chew while the adults planned the day. An ancient breakfast bar, basically. Here is a joke they didn't have time to laugh at. What is the difference between a good morning and a bad one? Whether the fire wakes up before you do. And now let's return to the most important part of the morning, planning. You had to decide every single day what the risk was worth. Do you stay near shelter and hope the traps worked? Or do you pack up and move? Do you head toward the frozen river where the mammoths pass, knowing that means danger, but also meat and bones and hides? The elders would speak, slowly, carefully. No one argued loudly. Every decision was measured against the memory of the last bad winter. No one wanted another funeral. Sometimes you split up. Some went to scavenge, some stayed to guard the camp, repair tools, or simply sit beside the fire and whisper to it, asking it to keep the others safe. One more curious fact to end this part. In a few burial sites, we've found ashes inside the graves, not scattered, packed, as if someone scooped part of the fire and buried it with the dead. Was it to keep them warm, to light their path, or just a final goodbye? We don't know, but we can guess. So the morning trudges on. The sky grows brighter. The group stretches and creaks like old trees waking up. Somewhere, far off, a bird calls. A small sound, a promise. Because if you survived the night, maybe, just maybe, you'll survive the day. Maybe. The sun is up now, but don't get too excited. It doesn't mean it's warm. The light is pale and fragile, more decorative than helpful. It spills across the snow in long, thin ribbons and shimmers on the frost-cloaked trees, like some cruel joke from nature. Look, sunshine, but also still freezing. You're moving now. The group has decided to travel today because the traps were empty, the meat is low, and staying still is as dangerous as wandering. Prehistoric people didn't live in one place for long. They drifted, chased, scavenged, adjusted. To live meant to move, period. And so the day begins with packing the world onto your back. Clothes, furs, dried food, bones for tools, animal fat smeared into leather pouches. Not in suitcases or bags, but slung over shoulders in hide slings or bundled into massive sled-like draggers called travois, long poles tied together and hauled behind you like giant prehistoric shopping carts. One of the strangest things we've discovered. Some travois had tiny carved figurines tied to the front, little animals, human heads, or even abstract patterns. Historians still debate whether these were religious symbols, protective charms, or just prehistoric bumper stickers. As the group moves, the air is so cold that your breath doesn't drift. It snaps, crackling in the quiet. Every step punches through a crust of ice. Your boots, stitched fur wrapped in strips of leather, are holding together, but just barely. Your feet, already numb. Let's talk for a moment about those boots, because honestly, they were incredible. Archaeologists have uncovered footwear made from mammoth hide, stuffed with dried grass, sealed with fat, and stitched with sinew so tight that even water couldn't sneak in. Some even had toe flaps, basically ancient snow gaiters. You probably wouldn't survive even 1 mile in that snow barefoot, but with these, you had a fighting chance. One site even revealed a child's shoe, with small scratches on the sole, possibly from slipping on ice, or maybe from a game. We'll never know which, but it's a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, kids found ways to play. Because being prehistoric didn't mean being humorless. Want a joke from the trail? What's colder than mammoth breath? Me, when I forget my foot wrapping. Okay, not hilarious, but after 6 hours of walking through wind so sharp it could slice a thought in half, you take what you can get. Now on the move, everyone has a job. The strongest carry the heaviest loads. The watchful scan for predators. The elders point out signs, broken twigs, sun angles, animal droppings. And the children? They gather kindling, chase birds, or ask questions no one has time to answer. Why is the sky blue? Because it's not warm, someone mutters. Travel days were exhausting, but not random. You didn't wander aimlessly. You followed ancient routes, ice highways carved through generations, passed down through song and memory. A boulder with a red mark meant shelter nearby. A tree with broken bark, water close, and always you listened to the wind, not in a poetic way. Literally. Many groups believed the wind spoke. If it howled through the trees a certain way, you turned back. If it hissed low and steady, you kept going. Wind was more than weather, it was a voice, a warning. Here's your quirky detail. In one cave along a known migration path, a piece of hollow bone was found tied to a tree branch with sinew. When the wind blew just right, it made a low whistling sound, almost like a flute. Historians aren't sure if it was a marker or just someone's idea of a joke. Either way, imagine trekking through miles of ice, nearly frozen, only to hear a ghostly tune blowing from a tree. Delightful. Let's talk meals. You don't stop to cook. There's no time. If you're lucky, you chew strips of frozen meat until your jaw aches. If you're really lucky, someone found roots or berries frozen solid enough to snap like candy. Meals on the move were a test of teeth, but there were moments of rest. Usually at midday, when the light peaked and the body started to betray you, you'd huddle around a tiny fire if there was fuel, drink snowmelt from a leather pouch and mumble complaints about the cold. Complaining was a group activity, a tradition, a pressure valve. And of course, someone always fell. Tripped over ice, got stuck in a drift, sank into a hole. The laughter? Immediate. Not cruel, just automatic. If you couldn't laugh at a faceplant in the snow, you weren't going to make it through the day. But let's not sugarcoat it. Travel was dangerous. The cold could bite through even the thickest hide. If a foot twisted wrong or a trap was stepped on, yes, they set traps for others too. There was no ambulance, no doctor. Just a choice, carry them or leave them. There is a burial site where a woman's leg bones show signs of a poorly healed break, meaning she was carried for weeks, maybe months. Someone took that burden. Someone said, "We won't leave her." That's not just survival. That's love. And eventually, as the sun starts to sink and the world turns orange gold, the group looks for shelter. A rocky outcrop, a grove of wind-blocking trees, an old campsite still marked by blackened stones from the last fire. And you know what? You made it. One more day. One more freezing, aching, blistered, breathless day. Because that's what they did. They kept walking, kept adapting, kept choosing movement over surrender. You, reading this now? You're only here because someone once tied fur to their feet, dragged half a deer across a frozen plain, and made a joke about mammoth breath on a day just like this. So tonight, while your heated blanket hums and your thermostat obeys your every whim, take a moment to picture them walking, cold, tired, singing softly to the wind, still moving. The sun is fading fast now, slipping behind the trees like it's trying not to be noticed. Everything's going blue again, the kind of deep twilight blue that doesn't feel like a color but like a warning. The group moves faster. They've found a spot, a ridge with rock on one side and dense forest on the other, a natural barrier against wind and only one direction to guard. That's gold in a world with no fences. It's not the best shelter, but the best shelter is the one you reach before nightfall. So the work begins again. There's no sighing, no, we have to set up camp. No one complains. Because the only thing worse than sleeping in the snow is not waking up from it. First, the fire pit. They dig a shallow depression and ring it with stones, not decorative, but functional. The rocks will absorb heat and radiate it back throughout the night. You place them carefully, like you're setting teeth into the jaw of the earth itself. Next, bedding. Dry pine branches, moss, grass. Someone left a stash here, hidden under a slab of bark last season. It's brittle, but dry. A miracle in survival terms. You stack it into piles, lay the furs on top, and boom, prehistoric mattress. And now, the fire. Again. You pull out the ember bundle, gently unwrap the moss, and breathe life into it like you're waking a baby bird. A few flakes of tinder catch, A flame blossoms, and you've done it. You've conjured light from dead things. Someone cheers quietly. Another pats you on the back. No words, just warmth. Quirky fact. Some groups kept small fire-starting pouches made from the stomachs of rodents, soft, waterproof, and filled with dry moss and flint chips. One archaeologist even found one with a carved charm sewn into it, possibly to bring luck or to stop the mouse from haunting the owner. Hard to say. Once the fire's going, it's time for food. Again, no gourmet spread. Maybe some frozen marrow bones, cracked open with a sharp rock. Maybe dried fish soaked in snowmelt and heated over the fire. If someone caught a rabbit today, it's skinned and sizzling on a spit. But probably, you're licking fat off your fingers and calling it dinner, and somehow it's enough. Now the shelter goes up. A frame of branches is leaned against the rock wall. Over it, layers of fur, bark, woven grass mats, anything to trap heat. Someone checks the wind direction, then stacks snow on one side for insulation. Another trims low branches nearby to cover gaps. You'd think they were building a cabin with how focused they are. But that's the thing, when you live at the edge of survival, nothing is ever just anything. Even the little things are big. Someone pulls out a small pouch and scatters ashes in a circle around the sleeping area, a quiet ritual. Not to ward off spirits, but to track footprints. If something walks too close in the night, you'll see it in the morning. Here's something sweet. In several campsites across Europe and Asia, tiny bone whistles have been found near sleeping areas. They weren't used for music. They were used by children to call their parents in the dark if they woke up scared. A prehistoric baby monitor. Now the group settles in. One person hums, another tells a story. Half true, half legend. A tale of a time when the snow wasn't so cruel and the nights weren't so long. Maybe they believe it, maybe they just like the sound of hope. But not everyone sleeps. There's still night duty, just like we talked about before. This time, someone younger takes it, not because they're brave, because they have to learn. Survival doesn't get passed down through blood. It gets passed down through watch shifts. And so the night begins again. The fire pops, the sky fades to black, and in the silence, a memory stirs. Because this place, it's familiar. Last winter, someone died here. Maybe a grandmother, maybe a child. There's no grave, just a mark on the rock. A handprint in charcoal. 4 fingers, not 5. It's old, but it remains. Some say the dead stay near these places, not in a spooky way, in a comforting way, watching, guarding, warming the wind just a little when your fire flickers too low. Historians still debate whether those ancient markings were warnings or invitations, but either way they speak. And they say, you've been here before. You'll be here again. The night rolls on. The wind howls, but the shelter holds. The fire dimly glows, and the group breathes in unison. Humans stacked like driftwood, tangled in hides, faces pressed close to the warmth. And just before you sleep, someone reaches over and presses a charm into your hand. A tooth, a feather, a carved bit of bone. Nothing fancy. Just a piece of the day, meant to carry you through the night. You hold it close. You close your eyes. You breathe in the smoke and the quiet and the ancient feeling of not being alone, because this is what humans do. They build warmth where there is none. They carry light into dark places. They find a way to survive. You probably wouldn't last long out here, but someone like you did again and again. And that's why you're here now, curled in bed, drifting, listening, remembering the fire that never quite goes out. The stars are full tonight, not scattered, not hidden, full. They spread across the sky in thick, clustered bands, like someone spilled silver across a black blanket. You're not used to seeing them like this. No light pollution, no cars, no humming power lines, just sky, cold and endless, and you're staring at it because sleep won't come. Not because you're uncomfortable, though let's be honest, the ground is doing your spine no favors. No, it's because the sky feels heavy. Too big, too close, like it might fall on you if you blink. You roll over. The fire's burned low again, glowing like a heartbeat under ash. Someone shifts beside you, muttering in their sleep. Someone else coughs once, twice, then goes still again. The night is alive with tiny sounds, snapping twigs, soft breath, snow melting off pine needles and pattering to the ground. And above it all, that sky. Here is the wild part. Prehistoric people didn't just look at the stars for fun. They used them, they tracked them. Some even mapped them into cave walls using nothing but bits of charcoal and spit. Imagine, you're wrapped in hides, your teeth chattering, and you're scratching constellations onto stone by torchlight. There's a cave in France, Lascaux, you might have heard of it. Inside, among all the famous animal paintings, archaeologists found a cluster of dots, not random, the same pattern as the Pleiades, the Seven Sisters, a winter constellation. That means they weren't just seeing the stars, they were remembering them, recording them, living by them. And yes, historians still debate whether this was intentional astronomy or just artistic coincidence. But come on, have you seen how precise those dots are? These people weren't guessing, they were observing. Which makes sense because stars told time, they signaled seasons. When to move, when to stay, when to hunt, when to huddle down and wait. You didn't have calendars or apps or alarms. You had Orion rising over the ridge. You had the Big Dipper pointing toward your next shelter. You had the Pleiades glittering low in the sky, reminding you the wolves would be moving again soon. Quirky detail. Some tribes called that cluster of stars not sisters, but fireflies frozen in the sky. A little poetic, a little terrifying. They believed those fireflies were spirits who got lost in the cold and now danced above to keep watch. There's something comforting in that idea, that even when no one else is awake, someone is watching. Still, the sky can't keep you warm, so you tuck back into your furs, trying to find the last pocket of heat left. The fire needs feeding, but your limbs don't want to move, so you make a trade, you whisper to it. Just a small thing, a single word. A sound you heard your grandmother say once before sunrise. And then, because you be bored and cold and can sleep, you start thinking about the weirdest thing you packed today. The skull. You remember that? Yeah, a bird skull. Small, smooth, hollow. You found it months ago, dangling from a tree branch like nature's wind chime. No explanation, but something about it felt right. So now it's yours, tied to your belt. Not for luck, not for power, just for presence. A reminder that the world is strange and beautiful and a little unsettling. Historians have found thousands of little totems like this. Bones, feathers, stones, claws, tied to clothing, tucked in pouches, placed near heads during sleep. Not tools, not food, just things. Things that meant something. Some were shaped, carved. A tiny bear with a chipped nose, a fish with a hole in its tail. Others were untouched, left just as they were when found. No two the same, but all important. And not just to the living. In some burials, people were placed with their totems, not treasure, not weapons, but small objects with no practical use. Which raises the question, what do you take with you when you leave the cold behind forever? A tool? A memory? A bird skull? Here's another strange little fact. In one grave, archaeologists found a person buried with a perfectly smooth round stone. No markings, no features, just smooth. It had been polished by hand, likely for years. Was it a toy? A comfort item? A symbol of eternity? We don't know. But I love the idea that someone sat beside a fire every night, rolling a stone between their palms like a modern fidget toy, letting it soak up their warmth. So maybe that's the answer. When the cold bites, when the stars feel too close, when your toes are numb and your courage thinner than your furs, you hold something. Something smooth, something small, something that says, you're still here. You reach into your pouch now, feel the bird skull. It's still cold, but it's real, that's enough. And finally, you feel your breath slow. Your shoulders relax. The fire pops once, twice. The stars shift just a little, and you sleep. Not because it's safe, but because you've earned it. You've made it through another night of stars and cold and questions with no easy answers. You've held on to something. Maybe just a story, maybe just warmth, and that's more than enough. So tonight, when you look out your window or scroll past a photo of stars on your phone, take a second. Imagine the ground beneath you, frozen solid. Imagine the weight of fur on your chest. Imagine the silence of a world before words. And remember, You made it this far because someone stared up at the same stars, clutching a tiny, meaningless, absolutely priceless object, and believed they'd live to see morning. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing background music, and let's take a gentle stroll through the night together. The morning doesn't greet you so much as nudge you, not with light or warmth, but with a strange stillness, the kind that makes your skin prickle before you even open your eyes. The fire's gone low, the air feels heavier, the wind's changed direction, and everyone else is already awake. You sit up slowly, furs falling from your shoulders, breath fogging the air in front of you. No one speaks. They're listening. Then you hear it too. Drumming. Not music. Not anything human. Just a distant, deep, rhythmic thud. 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 You know the sound. You've heard it before. It's not thunder. It's not footsteps. It's ice. Somewhere, not far from camp, a frozen river is shifting, cracking under its own weight. The sound travels through the land like the groan of a waking giant, and it is a reminder that the world you live in is still moving, even when it looks like stone. Prehistoric people were deeply in tune with these signs. A tree splitting from the cold wasn't just noise, it was a message. If the ice cracked near camp, you moved. If the birds flew in silence, you stayed still. If your dog wouldn't stop staring at a tree, you left an offering, just in case. Quirky fact time. In some ancient sites, people built stone stacks near dangerous places, thin ice, hidden pits, or steep drops. These weren't altars or decorations, they were warnings, landmarks that whispered, "Not here." Basically the original version of a traffic cone, except, you know, sacred. Today your group decides to stay put. No movement, no hunting, just maintenance, mending, scraping, preparing. Days like this were rare, precious, a chance to rest without relaxing, because no one ever really relaxes in the Ice Age. You pull out your tools, stone blades, bone needles, sinew thread. Someone else brings over a ripped piece of hide and a look that says, "Please fix this before my knees fall off," and you get to work. Sewing, believe it or not, was one of the most valuable skills in the prehistoric world, more important than fighting, more important than carving. You could be the toughest hunter around, but if your boots leaked, you were done. And sewing wasn't a lazy activity. No thimbles, no finger protection, just sharp bones, cold fingers, and stubborn materials. Even one crooked stitch could let in water, and water in freezing weather meant death. Archaeologists once found a tiny carved bone needle, less than an inch long, in the remains of a camp buried under layers of ice. It was still threaded, still loaded, like someone put it down and meant to pick it back up. That needle is over 17,000 years old, and someone used it the same way you're threading your own now, slowly, carefully, muttering about how this would be so much easier if mammoths had just evolved to grow fleece. Let's talk gear. Every piece of clothing was functional art, not just stitched but reinforced, layered, personalized. Some people burned patterns into their sleeves. Others tied little charms onto drawstrings, not for beauty but for story. You didn't wear a shirt. You wore your history. Here's something fun. In one burial, a woman was found with her coat carefully folded beside her. Not on her, beside her. It had hundreds of decorative beads sewn along the hem, mostly shells, some carved bone. Why wasn't she buried in it? Maybe it was passed down, maybe someone else needed it, or maybe, just maybe, it was too special to bury. Now, while you work, others are boiling bones. Not for meat, for glue. Yeah, you heard that right. Bone glue. Boil bones long enough, scrape the jelly off, let it cool, and you've got the world's first adhesive. Prehistoric superglue. Used to fix tools, repair bindings, even seal cracks in shelters. Want a light joke? One hunter told another, "If your spear breaks again, I'm gluing it to your hand." That's probably funnier if your life depends on that spear not snapping mid-mammoth. Midday rolls by. The light softens. The sky turns that weird yellow-gray color that always comes before snow. People start shifting closer to the fire. Conversation picks up. Low, tired, but warm. And then someone pulls out the story stone. You've seen it before. It's smooth, flat, dark, probably volcanic, and on one side, scratches, not random. A mammoth, etched carefully into the surface with lines for tusks and dots for eyes. This is how stories were told, not just through words, but through objects. You'd pass the stone around, and whoever held it would share a memory, a hunt, a dream, a warning, not always true, but always real. Historians still debate whether these objects were communal or belonged to one storyteller, but the pattern is clear. People needed stories as much as they needed fire. They weren't just entertainment, they were instructions for staying alive. If the mammoth turns left, you climb. If it lowers its head, you freeze. If it grunts twice, you run. If you see the owl on the hill 3 nights in a row, don't cross the river. If the snow falls in silence, someone will leave before morning. Some of it sounds like superstition. Some of it sounds like code. All of it feels like truth. And when it's your turn to hold the stone, you don't hesitate. You tell them about the night the stars flickered and the tree cracked and your grandmother whispered a name you didn't know. You tell them about the time you saw a bear in your dream and the next day found tracks in the snow. You tell them about the bird skull. And when you finish, no one claps, they just nod. Because stories don't end out here, they're passed on. Later that night, when you're curled up again, you feel something tucked under your arm. The story stone. Someone left it with you. For tomorrow. Not because they think you'll tell another tale, but because they know you'll remember. And so you fall asleep not with fear or hunger or pain, but with story. And that, more than fire, more than furs, more than food, is what kept people alive in the coldest nights of prehistory. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing background music, and let's take a gentle stroll through the night together. You wake up with frost in your eyelashes. Again, not snow, frost. Formed from your own breath freezing on your face during the night. It crackles when you blink. And for a second, you don't move. Not because you're cold, but because you don't know if your toes remembered how to be alive. You wiggle them, slowly, one by one, still there, still yours. Barely. Someone nearby groans and shifts, pulling their fur tighter. Another sits up, rubbing their arms, exhaling in short, hissing bursts. It's a ritual now. This miserable, aching, frost-bitten morning groan. You don't complain anymore. You just exist. The fire? A whisper, barely glowing under a bed of ash. Someone forgot to feed it during the night. No one gets scolded. Everyone knows how hard it is to stay awake. Instead, a few of you gather bark and old branches, pile them on, and take turns breathing into the coals like you're coaxing a secret back into the world. And as it flares back to life, bright orange licking through the grey, you remember something. You made it through another night. That's the measure of success here. Not comfort, not luxury, just not dead. The bar is low and still most don't clear it. Today is a day for cleaning, for organizing, for checking supplies and tightening bindings and scraping the grime from stone blades, and maybe, just maybe, for carving. Now don't roll your eyes. I know carving doesn't sound thrilling, but in prehistoric life it was more than art. It was identity, belief, connection. Quirky fact. Across dozens of sites from Siberia to Spain, archaeologists have found carved bone fragments, often shaped like animals. Some were decorative, others, tools disguised as beauty. Imagine using a mammoth bone shaped like a bird wing to smooth hides. Functional and aesthetic. The Ice Age equivalent of a designer multi-tool, you settle into the quiet rhythm of the work, carving the edge of a spear, scratching tiny lines into a piece of antler, not for fun, for meaning. There's a pattern you always make, 3 short lines in a row, 1 long line underneath. It doesn't mean anything to anyone else, but to you, it's every night you survived last winter, and the one person who didn't, a friend, a sibling, maybe a child. Historians still debate whether Ice Age people had graveyards in the way we understand them, but they certainly had ritual spaces, caves where bones were arranged in circles, hilltops with mounds of burned stones, places where the dead weren't just remembered, but kept company. Here's something that might stop you for a second. In one ancient burial, a child was laid on a bed of flowers. real pressed flowers. Gathered, preserved, then placed beneath their body. No utility, no warmth, just beauty. What does that tell you? It tells you that even in the bleakest winters, even when survival took everything, they still made room for tenderness, so you keep carving. Someone near the fire is singing, not loudly, just humming, a low, breathy tune, the kind that feels older than language. Maybe it is. Some melodies survive longer than the words that once described them. And this is how the day passes, not with excitement or drama, but with continuity. That's what survival is. Not a single great act, but 1,000 small ones. Each fire, each step, each scratch on a bone. Someone starts to cook, or, well, heat. A thick piece of fat gets dropped into a pot with snowmelt and dried meat. It doesn't smell amazing, but it's warm, and it slides down the throat like a blessing. You sit near the edge of camp, watching the trees, waiting, just in case. Movement catches your eye. Not a predator, not another clan, just a bird. Bright feathers, small, flitting between branches, pecking at something invisible. Totally ordinary, but it feels like a gift. Quirky detail number 2. Prehistoric people sometimes wore bird feathers inside their clothing, not for show, but for sound. When you moved, the feathers would rustle, warning nearby animals, or letting your friends know you were near, like a prehistoric ringtone. It sounds silly, until you realize that anything that made you feel less alone was priceless. That evening before bed, the group gathers again, not for a meeting, just to be close, huddled around the fire, shoulders touching, furs wrapped tight, the kind of quiet where every crack of the flames feels like a word. Someone brings out a flute, hollow bone, simple holes. They play a note, just one. It wavers. They play another. And suddenly the fire has a song. And let's just acknowledge it. Prehistoric people made music, actual music, flutes, drums, rhythms tapped on stone, not just to pass time, but to express what words couldn't. Joy, fear, longing. You wouldn't have survived without food and heat and shelter. But also, you wouldn't have survived without sound, without story, without the strange comfort of a flute on a frozen night. So here we are again. The fire is fading. The night is returning. The stars blink slowly into view. You crawl back into your furs, your hands stiff, your shoulders sore, your stomach just barely full, and you feel something press against your chest. It's the carved antler from earlier. Someone tucked it there while you weren't looking. No note, no words, just a silent reminder that you are seen. You are part of something, even out here, even now. You close your eyes, the fire flickering behind your lids like distant lightning. And you sleep. Not because it's safe, but because it's human. Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing background music, and let's take a gentle stroll through the night together. There's no sunrise, just a slow leaking of color into the world. Gray turns to blue, shadows stretch and pull themselves upright. The cold is deeper now, but quieter. It is the kind of cold that doesn't scream anymore. It just settles into your bones like it has always belonged there. You don't shiver, you just are. This morning the decision is made. You move at first light. Not for food, not for firewood, for something older. The elders say the time is right, that the stars last night lined up with the stones, that the frost pattern on the riverbank mirrored the scars on the mammoth tusk by the fire. Signs. Historians still debate whether prehistoric people truly believed in signs or simply followed patterns that kept them alive. But belief and survival were never separate out here. They couldn't be. So you pack quickly. Not everything, just what's needed. The fire is smothered, the embers wrapped in moss and tucked away. The old bedding is left behind. Maybe someone else will find it. Maybe it'll rot into the ground. Either way, it's not yours anymore. You walk in silence. Snow crunches underfoot. Your breath fogs and fades. Every sound is too loud. Every tree looks like it might open up and speak. You don't ask where you're going. You already know. The ancestor place. It's not marked on a map. It's not whispered in words. It is remembered through footfall and story. and the way your ribs tighten when the path curves north. You don't ask why. You just follow. Along the way, you pass old campsites. A stone circle blackened with soot. A ring of broken bones. A tree with scratch marks at shoulder height. Bare, not fresh. Still too close for comfort. You press on, and eventually you see it. A clearing. Open, flat, silent. The snow here is thin, trampled by animals, brushed away by wind. At its center stands a vertical stone, half buried, crusted with lichen. Not natural, placed, deliberately, a marker, not a grave, not exactly, just a memory turned solid. Around it are others, smaller stones, shaped ones, some stacked, some laid flat, a few with lines etched into them, not writing, but not random either. If you've been here before, you'd know how to read it. Your group spreads out slowly, some kneel, some sit. One person begins to hum, that same song from the night before, only quieter, as if trying not to disturb the bones underground. And you? You walk toward the marker. You're holding something. You didn't realize it until now. The carved antler, the one someone gave you. You thought it was a gift, but maybe it's an offering. You place it at the base of the stone. No speech, no explanation, just a gesture, saying, I'm here, I remember, I survived. That's the real reason for this place, to remember that survival isn't guaranteed, that you walk on a floor made of those who didn't make it, that you owe them, not guilt but gratitude. There's a story someone whispers beside you, about a boy who came here once and left a piece of mammoth fur for his sister, about a woman who danced in this clearing during the last eclipse and didn't stop until the snow melted, about a child who was born here in the middle of winter while the wolves circled just out of sight. No one confirms if any of it is true. That's not the point. The point is being here, breathing here, standing where they stood with the same frost on your face. Quirky fact. In one ancient ritual site, archaeologists found a perfect circle of reindeer antlers buried just beneath the surface, their tips all pointing inward. No tools, no weapons, just bones, deliberately placed, possibly symbolic, possibly practical, possibly both. Historians still argue over it. Was it a calendar, a trap, a map, or just a message? Something like, we were here. We saw the same stars. We sang the same songs. We froze and laughed and died and left this for you. As the group begins to gather again, someone starts drawing in the snow. Circles, spirals, lines that connect. A child copies them with a stick. The adult pretends not to notice. It's tradition now. Soon the light starts to shift, not golden, just less grey. Time to go. You leave the clearing in silence, not because you're sad, because you're full, filled with presence, with memory, with story. And maybe that is the strangest thing about prehistoric survival. It wasn't just about staying alive. It was about staying connected to each other, to the land, to those who came before and those not yet born. Because when everything else disappears, warmth, food, light, what's left is the thread between people, between fire circles and frostbite, between footsteps in the snow and songs carried on the wind. So when you walk away, you don't look back, you don't have to. It's already inside you now. The fire you'll build tonight will remember this place. The food you eat will taste different. The stories you tell will stretch just a little longer. Because now you know. You are not the first, you will not be the last. And somehow that makes this freezing, aching, exhausting life a little warmer. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing background music, and let's take a gentle stroll through the night together. The wind tonight is soft, not gentle, soft, like the whisper of fabric against skin. It brushes through the trees in long, slow strokes, carrying the smell of smoke and old pine. And somewhere, not far from camp, an owl calls out once, low, steady, and patient. You're back where you began, back to your routine, back to survival. But it feels different now, doesn't it? A little quieter, a little more connected. The fire burns low. The group is smaller tonight. Someone didn't return from the last hunt. No one talks about it. But they all feel it. You can see it in the way they pass food around without smiling, in how no one finishes their stories. Grief doesn't look like weeping here, it looks like quiet cooperation. Still, life continues. A baby cries somewhere under a fir. Someone soothes them with a hum and a small carved stone toy, a deer with stubby legs and no antlers. You've seen that toy before. It's been passed from hand to hand, child to child, season to season. The details worn smooth by generations of tiny fingers. And you sit close to the fire, not for warmth, for memory. You're holding something again. Not a skull this time, not a story stone, just a piece of charcoal. Flat, dusty, black. And you're drawing. On a strip of bark, on the wall of the shelter, on your hand. Doesn't matter. Circles, spirals, a mammoth's tusk curling in on itself, a line of dots like stars. Maybe it means something, maybe it doesn't. But it's yours now, your mark. Historians still debate what prehistoric art was for. Was it religious, decorative, instructional? But the deeper truth might be simpler. It was a way of saying, I exist. And on nights like this, that's enough. Quirky fact to hold on to. In a cave in Spain, there's a handprint that's over 37,000 years old. Blown in ochre, fingers spread wide. The pigment is still there, still red. Someone, one person, stood there once and left a mark that outlived them by nearly 400 centuries. That's not just art, that's time travel. You press your own palm into the cold ground beside the fire, imagining the shape it leaves behind. It won't last 37,000 years, but it doesn't need to. Someone sees you do it. They nod, no words, just understanding. Later, you help repair the edge of the shelter. You melt snow to drink. You hum a song that was sung to you when you were small. You catch a child watching you wide-eyed. You wink. They smile. The cold forgets its grip for a moment. That's the last joke of the night, by the way. Why did the mammoth refuse to sit by the fire? Because every time it did, someone tried to eat it. Okay, not your best, but it gets a breath of laughter from the old man across the fire, and that's a victory. And then, it's time. The stars are back again. Not as many as last night, but enough. Enough to feel watched. Enough to feel remembered. You wrap yourself in fur. You curl close to the others. You listen to the fire crack, the snow settle, the breathing of those who made it one more night. And slowly, gently, the cold begins to fade. Not outside, but inside. Because you've walked a long way now. Through wind and ice. Through bone and ash. Through the thick silence of hunger and the warmth of shared stories. And here at the end we slow down. The fire slows. The heart slows. The breath lengthens. You might forget the names. You might forget the tools. But you won't forget the feeling of being human in a world trying to undo you. You won't forget the sound of a fire being born again. The weight of an antler in your hand. The moment when someone tucked a story into your coat without saying a word. This is what survival looked like. This is what you come from, and this is why you are here now. Not because you're strong, not because you're lucky, but because someone, long before you, stood in the snow, frost in their lashes, breath sharp in their lungs, and chose to carry on. So tonight, before you sleep, hold that charcoal memory, trace the line of your hand, and know, you are never alone. You've been walking through history with me. Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing background music, and let's take a gentle stroll through the night together. If you enjoyed this journey through the coldest nights of human memory, please like, share, and comment below. It helps more than you know. Good night.